If you find yourself fixating on an activity or item every other week on this new thing for hours at a time, you're not alone. This is called hyperfixation. Hi, my name is Kristen Souza, a licensed mental health counselor specializing in ADHD. And chances are, if you have ADHD, you've experienced hyperfixation. What is hyperfixation? Hyperfixation is total engagement on an item or activity. When does it become a problem? Hyperfixation becomes a problem when you ignore all your other responsibilities to do this one thing. Let me give you some examples. Maybe you take up creating your own blog from scratch and you spend hours upon hours not taking breaks, getting snacks, etc. to work on your new blog. Maybe you have a project at work due in a couple days and you just put it off to work on this specific new hobby of yours. Another example of hyperfixation is getting a new video game and maybe not leaving your room for days at a time to play this one game. This is really common in people with ADHD, and a lot of times you'll take up new hobbies all the time and hyperfixate it and then on to the next thing. I've even seen a lot of my clients spend a lot of money on this new hyperfixation and then give it up a week later because it no longer brings them joy. People that are hyperfixating on a specific hobby, item, or activity find a lot of joy in this new thing. So again, when can hyperfixation become a problem? It really becomes a problem again when you start ignoring all the other important things in your life. And this can be at work. So let's say you have a project, a really important project due, and you put it off to hyperfixate on a new problem you found going down a rabbit hole in a thread at work. So it has nothing to do with the project that's really important that is due tomorrow. Instead, you find a problem in a thread at work that you start to hyperfixate on. Now in your relationship, let's say you find a new project in your backyard. Maybe you take up gardening and you completely ignore your partner for days at a time, and the list goes on. It could really get in the way of things at school as well. If you have important projects due and you take up a new activity or you're super hyperfixated on a specific item, you might ignore deadlines and start to be penalized with poor grades and poor performance at school. So it can really start to add up if you don't identify when you're hyperfixating. It's really important to recognize when you start to hyperfixate on a new activity or item so that you can stop it or put a time limit to it. Starting a new activity and hyperfixating does not always have to be a bad thing. In fact, you can use it to your advantage in certain situations. People with ADHD are often really great at problem solving, and you might hyperfixate on this problem and complete the task in the time allotted. So you can use hyperfixation to your advantage for task completion. There are some ways you can manage hyperfixation, and the first thing I'm going to recommend is using a timer. So if you are really into an activity or a certain item and you're totally engaged with it and you still want to work on it but not go down a rabbit hole and work on it for hours and ignore all your household and life responsibilities, set a timer, give yourself a certain amount of time, and when the timer goes off, stop doing that activity. It doesn't mean you have to stop altogether. Like, you can do it daily. Just set limits so you're not forgetting about everything else in your life. Number two, seek support. So if you have any friends or family you can talk to about it, and maybe you can say something like, hey, if you notice that I'm going, we can talk about it. Just having that social support is really important. People close to you that can recognize when you're hyperfixating can let you know, because sometimes it's hard to see yourself. Seek a therapist. There are a lot of wonderful therapists out there that are specialized in ADHD, evidence-based therapy, and focuses on their rational thoughts and behavioral portion. We have a video on CBT so you can learn more about that, but it's really helpful with the behavioral modification portion for the negative symptoms of ADHD. Final thoughts on hyperfixation and ADHD. I find that many people use hyperfixation to their advantage to get tasks done at work, home, and at school. If you find yourself negatively impacted by hyperfixation, there are tools and support out there for you. We hope you found this helpful. If you or a loved one are struggling with ADHD, you don't have to do it alone. Talking to a therapist that specializes in ADHD can help you understand your symptoms better. We've linked some valuable resources in the description and comments to help you find a therapist, psychiatrist, and other useful resources. Check them out.